What's happening, everybody? Ryan Thomas here, back for another episode of the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. It's been a little bit since I've been on the show. Been super busy trying to enjoy my summer as much as possible. The weather has been amazing here in Western New York. I have my pool that I'm trying to enjoy, and I'm also trying to enjoy just this newfound normal, return to normalcy that we have here in the world today. And I'm thankful that, things have slowly but surely moved back to normal, throughout the, summer here. So now that I'm back on the mic, back on the show, I want to remind you guys that you can find the Thomas Take Sports Podcast anywhere, whether it's on audio, whether it's visual here on my YouTube channel or on my Twitter at Ryan Thomas Take. My podcast is everywhere you can tune in. Enjoy the show, whether it's MMA, NFL, NHL, Major League Baseball. I got a lot of really cool stuff coming up for Major League Baseball in the next few weeks here as well. We're inching closer to the whole fantasy football, discussions. It's a little early, but I have a few leagues that are drafting pretty soon, actually. So I'll definitely let you guys in on a few secrets there as far as who you should draft and why. But first, before we dive into the subject matter of today's show, which is the aftermath of UFC 263, I want to remind you guys that this show is sponsored by Labatt Blue, Labatt USA. Labatt Blue, the Canadian Pilsner, the world's best-selling Canadian beer, brewed with the finest ingredients, including renowned Hallertau hops, Turo malted barley, and pure Canadian barley. Labatt Blue has a clean, refreshing taste with distinct hop aroma, delicate fruit flavor, and a slightly sweet aftertaste. Labatt Blue, the show sponsor there. Shout out to them. And we're off and running. It's showtime. So, UFC 263 aftermath. Who is next for the winners and losers of UFC 263? Last night's fights were fantastic. The UFC has a rare miss as of 2020 or 2021. The fights have been phenomenal. They've been able to put out great fights. Even the fights that you would least expect to be great have been great, and then some. But last night, I knew that it would be a great night of fights, and it delivered even beyond my expectations. Going into it, I had a lot of people asking me, who am I betting on? Who do I like? Didn't make any actual bets per se for last night's action, but if I would have, I did put out my picks in general, and I did pick the man that stole the show last night to win his rematch with Deiveson Figueiredo, and that is none other than the new UFC flyweight champion, Brandon Moreno. Recapping the action here, which fight stood out the most? Of course, it is that Moreno-Figueiredo fight. The rematch had all of the, fixings and trimmings as far as expectations, being that the first fight was one of the best fights that I've ever seen. It was a true classic with just back and forth action, a mixed martial arts fight that saw every level of mixed martial arts, every discipline within mixed martial arts take place, whether it's grappling, striking, Muay Thai, kickboxing, all the above. The first fight checked off so many boxes for MMA fans between Moreno and Figueiredo. So the rematch was much needed. We needed to find out who was the true winner, who was truly the better version, Moreno or Figueiredo. And on this night, last night, Brandon Moreno got it done. Not only did he get it done, he's a dominant UFC flyweight champion in the making. Coming off of that performance versus Figueiredo, Figueiredo had dispatched pretty much everybody. The only guy that gave him problems was Moreno in that first fight. And to see Moreno's skills translate from the first fight to the second fight and then some, to see an overall improvement in Brandon Moreno's game was really something special. But my take is simply this. Post Moreno's UFC 263 flyweight title winning performance, I have seen a lot of title fights over the course of my fandom and UFC history, and I've seen a lot of fighters enjoy winning the flyweight title or the bantamweight title or any of the titles, right? But to see them enjoy it is one thing. Some of the fighters expect it. Some of the fighters don't expect it. I have never witnessed a fighter as jovial, as shocked, as happy, as thrilled as Brandon Moreno was when he took home that UFC flyweight title last night. It honestly was pretty inspiring. And watching Brandon Moreno in the post, fight presser with Joe Rogan in the Octagon, the post fight, Octagon interview, I've never seen a fighter like that. The only fighter I've ever seen that giddy, two come to mind, Michael Bisping and Charles Oliveira. Both guys had long, arduous journeys towards winning the UFC title. Whether it was the lightweight title in the case of Oliveira or the middleweight title in the case of Bisping. But for Moreno, this one hit different because Moreno has been through the trials and tribulations of being an MMA fighter. And being an MMA fighter is not the easiest thing for obvious reasons. The sport in and of itself is extremely difficult. But the lack of opportunity for, undercard fighters to really make money or get their shine. Brandon Moreno has battled from being a Ultimate Fighter contestant to being picked last out of all of the Ultimate Fighter contestants to winning the show to being a contender to now being a champion. And I should say prior to being a contender, being a entry-level UFC fighter, then becoming a contender, then becoming the UFC champion. That is such a rarity in this sport nowadays to see a guy like Brandon Moreno, like Charles Oliveira, like Michael Bisping actually become the champion. There's only those three examples. Another one that I'd have for you guys is Matt Serra, who did it in epic fashion, obviously against GSP, George St. Pierre in their first fight. Matt Serra defied the odds in that one. It's probably the biggest upset in the sport's history, but I really feel like Brandon Moreno did something very unique last night, very special. When I go back to, even 2-3 years ago when the UFC first got this deal going with ESPN, right? The first fight that they did was Cejudo and Dillashaw. And that was like the first, flyweight, main event fixture of one of those cards on ESPN Plus. And I thought that if Dillashaw won that fight, that the UFC flyweight division was done, that they would get rid of it. Fortunately, Cejudo won that fight. He did save the division. And ever since Cejudo walked away from the sport, it has created intrigue in that division because it was so unexpected that Henry Cejudo was going to retire. Not only did he retire, he stayed retired. He hasn't returned. Will he return? It's a huge story, and Moreno and Cejudo would be a huge fight. I don't know if Henry Cejudo has any interest in making 125 pounds again, but if he does, that would be the fight to make for that UFC flyweight division. I'm extremely excited and happy for Brandon Moreno, and I know typically I like to go down the card and give my take on every fight, but this is the big story. This is the story that I have to talk about. Right out of the chute here. Brandon Moreno, new UFC flyweight champion, so well deserved. Few fighters have battled through from the entry level to the championship status in the fashion that Brandon Moreno did. And he was counted out heavily in this rematch when I believed that he could win this rematch due to the fact that I thought he won the first fight. So shout out to Brandon Moreno. That was inspiring, and it couldn't happen to a nicer guy. In terms of what he brings to the table. Moreno, a really solid competitor as well, of course. So recapping the actual fight, Moreno versus Figgy, as in Davison Figueiredo. I like to call him Figgy. You have two fighters that knew a lot about one another from their first fight. Moreno, though, really fought with a different tenacity, almost overwhelmed Davison Figueiredo last night. And the scrambles, Moreno was transitioning very, very well. Had Figgy in a choke once, twice, and then finally finished him the third time in that transition on the ground grappling exchange where Moreno's on the back of Figgy, tries to angle for that choke, fires off some punches, angles for the choke again, fires off some more punches, and then Figgy was essentially in just such a bad position with his legs tied that Moreno knew he was going to get that position. So that was such an awesome way to end that rivalry in terms of just for now in that second fight. I do see these guys fighting a third time. That's also an option for Brandon Moreno and for the UFC and for the UFC flyweight division. I don't know if it'll happen immediately, to do 3 fights in a row with the same 2 guys. It's been done before. I can't say it hasn't been done before, but I really feel like that was a moment where, Moreno conclusively won that fight and decisively won that fight. And I'd like to see, Moreno maybe take on somebody else and even Figgy take on somebody else before they fight one another again. So that's my thoughts on Moreno versus Figgy. As we move on to the next big fight on the card, the simple fact is that there are a few fighters that lose, and even when they lose, they win. And Nate Diaz is one of them. When Nate Diaz wins, even when he loses, Leon Edwards is like, come on. Nate Diaz lost last night, and it was pretty decisive. 4 out of 5 rounds he lost, I'd say. I love Nate to death. One of the toughest SOBs that's ever put on a UFC glove. I think the toughest. But that 5th round was insanity. For Nate Diaz to be as badly hurt as he was by Leon Edwards throughout the entirety of that fight up until that specific moment. Nate Diaz's leg is banged up. Nate Diaz has 2 cuts, one on the side of this, the side of his head here, the other on the other side of his head, gushing blood, squirting blood from the sides of his head. And for Nate Diaz to rally any sort of offense or momentum, and for Nate Diaz to then catch Leon Edwards, for Nate Diaz to almost finish Leon Edwards in the 5th and final round with the last, minute and a half left. I mean, his stock went up despite the fact that he lost. Nate Diaz wins even when he loses. And I really feel that Leon Edwards put on a great game plan. He attacked that front leg, as has Conor McGregor and a lot of Nate's opponents, Jorge Masvidal as well. They're starting to see, that's a game plan that you have to implement against Nate Diaz. It's there for the taking. His weight is so heavy on his front leg. He's so flat-footed that you can really get some serious torque into that leg and damage it badly. I thought in the first round, Nate's leg was completely mangled and he was completely done. And yet, no, I was wrong again. Nate Diaz is never done. If these fights had no time limit, I feel like Nate Diaz might be undefeated. That's how tough, durable, and just nasty Nate Diaz is in terms of what he brings to the table. True grit. This fight was 5 rounds. This was originally scheduled to be a co-main event for UFC 262. That didn't happen due to the injury that Nate suffered. It was a cut over his eye that Leon Edwards opened up. And I know I'm not a doctor, of course, but I think when I look at Nate Diaz and I understand the amount of punishment that he has put himself through and how that punishment has hindered his last few performances, whether it's against Conor in the rematch, Jorge in their fight, even the Anthony Pettis fight that Nate Diaz won, that scar tissue that is under his eyes or over his eyes, on his eyebrows and under his eyes as well. I think Nate has to see somebody about that. I know that there has been, one simple case of a fighter that had the amount of scar tissue that Nate has in Wanderlei Silva, and he had complete, facial reconstruction, surgery, where his face did look considerably different. But the performances that he was able to put out beyond that surgery were the performances of Wanderlei Silva, that he wanted to put on. Those cuts, the scar tissue, I feel like it's hindering his performances. And it's something that he should definitely, have shaved down, so to speak, if he wants to continue to fight against high level, competition. I think that he is a high level competitor. He is a top of the food chain, durable fighter. And that's all well and good, but I want to see Nate Diaz get back in the win column. And I think that the optics of seeing Nate bloody is badass, but the optics to the judges are another thing. And these judges, they don't know jack squat about mixed martial arts. We've seen that with some of the scoring and decisions, over the last few years, of course. So, when someone sees Nate bleeding as a fan, as a diehard fan of Nate, I know that, Nate is okay. But the judges see that as, oh, Nate's getting his ass whooped. And, Leon did implement his game plan, did implement his strategy. He was winning, especially those first 3 rounds, pretty decisively. But Nate was still in the fight. He was still there. He was never in danger of being finished. And then, when you let Nate hang around like that in the 4th and 5th round, it's only a matter of time before he possibly catches you. And he caught Leon Edwards. I thought there was a little bit of hesitation to finish the fight from Nate. There was like 3 seconds where he, caught Leon with that slap right, left hand down the pipe combo, the 3-2, and he pointed at him. And if he didn't point at him, he might have finished him. If he would have just followed up some punches there, Leon was on roller skates, wobbly legs, wasn't really there for a moment there, and Nate kind of let it pass by. So close yet so far, close but no cigar for Nate Diaz. But, Leon Edwards, I have to say, recapping Leon and, Nate here, Leon Edwards is a tough guy. Leon Edwards is someone that I think will only get better as he continues to fight, and he only has become better as he has continued to fight in this 10-fight win streak. Each fight has been more impressive than the last, and I wondered who would be out there for Kamaru Usman to compete against, to give Kamaru a really tough time. The only guy that I see out there right now, outside of Colby Covington, of course, is Leon Edwards. Those 2 guys, Leon and Colby, could be trouble for Kamaru Usman. But truthfully, I feel Leon is a tougher fight for Usman than Colby is. And Colby, pushed the envelope with Kamaru in their first fight. But Leon Edwards, I feel, has grown considerably in terms of his game. His last few fights have been extremely impressive. The tricky, crafty savviness of Leon Edwards in these trips, in these really well-timed takedowns, his ability to take the back is very rare. You don't see that typically from any fighter, let alone somebody 170 pounds at that speed. At 170 pounds, and Edwards is a pretty fast cat at 170 pounds in this welterweight division. So I know Dana White says that Colby Covington is next for Usman. I think that's fair, but I think Edwards should face the winner. I don't think Leon Edwards should fight anyone else until he fights for the title. Nobody else until he fights for the title. So that's my thoughts on that. Great performance by Leon Edwards and another durable, tough, gritty, badass performance from Nate Diaz. So on to the main event of the UFC 263 event. The main event to me going in, I thought that Israel Adesanya had a realistic shot to make quick work out of Marvin Vettori. And that's no slight on Marvin Vettori. It's just that I think Israel Adesanya is just simply that special. And that didn't happen. The fight went the full 5 rounds. I have to say it was a pretty lackluster fight in terms of these 3 fights that we're talking about here on the show today. I feel like the main event was actually the worst fight in terms of the entertainment value and in terms of it being an actual fight. My biggest takeaway is that Marvin Vettori was no match for the biggest superstar in the UFC, and the biggest superstar in the UFC currently is Israel Adesanya. People can say Conor McGregor, of course. He brings the eyeballs. He brings the pay-per-view buys. For obvious reasons, he is the biggest superstar. Conor is the biggest superstar. But the biggest superstar also has to be somebody that's the new, the new superstar, the new next big thing, champion, checks off all the boxes in terms of the look, the bravado, the brash, cocky style. Israel Adesanya is the biggest superstar in the UFC in terms of the new value that he brings to the company. As well, he's undefeated now and continuously at 185 pounds as he defended his title last night. And he's beaten guys pretty decisively at 185. You look at the division and the lay of the land, he's beaten Vettori twice now. His next fight is with most likely Robert Whittaker, who he has already beaten. So Izzy is about to somewhat clean out the division when you look at the top 5 in terms of who Izzy has fought. He's already fought Derek Brunson. He's already, fought some of these other guys. and beaten them in decisive fashion. Of course, he's undefeated at 185. So, I feel like Vettori went in there with a very lackluster game plan, and wasn't really able to implement his game plan until he actually, in moments, tried his game plan. And I know you're in there, and it's easier said than done watching it in terms of actually being in there. And Israel Adesanya is a very dynamic fighter to face. But from a challenger versus champion perspective, I feel like Marvin Vettori is really going to be kicking himself today, in the day, after the days after UFC 263. I feel like Marvin Vettori is going to be saying to himself, damn it, I left way too much in there. I feel like he didn't push the action nearly enough. I feel like Israel Adesanya was able to dictate the pace of the fight, where the challenger has to be the bull in the china shop, going for broke, trying to win the belt. And Marvin Vettori just kind of let the fight get away from him. And that was a little bit disappointing given the pre-fight buildup. I thought Vettori would come in like a bat out of hell, and he didn't. And you take note from Jan Blachowicz, who fought Israel Adesanya at 205 and Izzy's last fight for the UFC light heavyweight strap. And Jan was able to take Izzy down. And I think the reason he was able to take Izzy down is due to the size advantage that Jan had over Izzy. Whereas Vettori did look more bulked up in this fight with Izzy than he ever had before, but he didn't necessarily use his size well. The only time he was really able to implement his size was with Israel's back to the cage. Marvin Vettori was completely unable to get Israel Adesanya down in the center of the octagon when he tried. And those moments were few and far between, but Israel Adesanya did show up in terms of understanding, what game plan Marvin Vettori would bring. And it was a offensive, wrestling-heavy game plan. But when Marvin couldn't get those initial takedowns, he didn't go back to the well. He kind of just abandoned the game plan and the wrestling, and just kind of left that, let that fall by the wayside, I should say. And that was disappointing. I thought that Marvin would continue his game plan, and he kind of deviated from it. And I think he's going to be kicking himself, because there were moments in that fight where he could have really controlled the action, and he didn't. So kind of an underwhelming main event. It's not on, the fault of Izzy. I think it's more so on the fault of Vettori. Izzy did his thing. He avoided the takedowns. He landed the big counter punches, landed really hard kicks, and outpointed Marvin Vettori in championship-like fashion. So, I'd like to see Israel Adesanya versus Robert Whittaker. I feel like that's a fight that makes a ton of sense. Whittaker looks like he is mightily improved since that first fight with Izzy. And Izzy is mightily improved since that first fight with Whittaker. So, that's one that you have the Auckland, New Zealand versus Australian, Austria rivalry, that I'd like to see that fight, as he said, in Auckland, New Zealand. That'd be really cool, barring, COVID and everything. But what a time, to see, the new era of fighter in the UFC, and that is Israel Adesanya. So that's it for the UFC 263 Aftermath recap. Hope you guys enjoyed the show. This podcast, of course, is also available anywhere you find your audio, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts. It's everywhere. So you can tune into this. Obviously, thank you for tuning into it on the visual and audio side of things. I will be back with more content. I'm so excited for the next few weeks. A lot to discuss. We are inching closer and closer to Buffalo Bills training camp, which means we're inching closer to the preseason, which means we're inching closer to the regular season. And I know the Bills Mafia is excited for this season, as am I. So, all that being said, I'm Ryan Thomas. That was the Thomas Take Sports Podcast, UFC 263 Aftermath Show. Thank you so much for tuning in. Take care and enjoy this beautiful Sunday afternoon.